And it concerns the difference between economic and economical, historic and historical, classic and classical, and very importantly, politics and policy. So let's start with the first pair, which is economic and economical. They're both adjectives, but they have actually very different meanings. Economic means related to the economy, which is a country's industry and trade system. For example, the country's economic situation is worsening. There are two related words to economic, which are important for you to know and use correctly, and these are economics, which is the subject of study related to the economy, and economist, which is a person, an expert in the field of economics. Notice the difference in pronunciation, word stress, economics and economist. So these words also, it's always good to review the pronunciation from a word stress point of view. So that's economic. What about economical? Now, economical has a completely different meaning. It means not costing a lot of money. For example, is solar energy more economical than fossil fuels? So it's more or less like cheaper. And there is an interesting expression related to this idea, and that is a false economy. And that means something that costs less now, but will cost more in the long run. For example, buying a cheap car is always a false economy. And the last thing to say about these two words is the adverb. The adverb form economically is used for both meanings. So let's have two examples. Economically, that's the first meaning, related to the economy of a country. The country is facing huge challenges. Second example, related to not costing very much. My savings are growing because I've been living economically. Also for pronunciation, notice that it is not economically. Many of you make this mistake of pronouncing C-A-L-L-Y as Cali. It's cli, economically. Right? So bear that in mind because it's important for the other words as well. Right, that's these pair. Let's look at historic and historical. Again, they're both adjectives. They're both related to history, so similar meanings, but slightly different. Historic means important in history. So it's related to history, but it also has the connotation of being very important, very big. For example, the fall of the Berlin Wall was a historic occasion. Historical just means related to history, related to things from the past. For example, I enjoy watching historical movies. And there is an adverb form, historically, but it's mainly used for the second meaning, related to things in the past. For example, this book is not always historically accurate. That brings us to the next pair, which is classic and classical. Again, both adjectives, but with different meanings. Actually, classic has two meanings. The first one means of high quality thanks to traditional style. For example, this is a classic car from the 1950s. And the second meaning of classic is typical. It's a synonym for typical. For example, you say this is a classic mistake many CEOs make, a typical mistake. It's a strange meaning, but that's a second meaning. Now, let's look at classical. Classical refers to art forms that belong to a long tradition. For example, Beethoven is my favorite classical composer. There is an adverb, classically, but is again mainly used for this second meaning, which is, for example, the example is she's a classically trained ballet dancer. Okay, let's look at the last pair. Lots of mistakes here I notice from many different students, so let's be very careful with these two words. Politics and policy. They are nouns. Now, looking at politics, politics refers to the activities of a government or the study of such activities. For example, I'm not particularly interested in politics, or he's going to study politics at university. Very important to remember this point. The adjective form of politics is political, not politic. The word politic doesn't exist. Unlike economic, classic, and historic, this word doesn't exist in English. So don't use it. For example, don't say, I try to avoid politic discussions. It's always, I try to avoid political discussions. It's the only adjective form for this word, politics. There is an adverb form, politically, obviously. So, for example, I try to avoid politically sensitive topics. Notice again the pronunciation. C-A-L-L-Y is not kali, it's kli, politically. So we had economically, historically, classically, and now politically. Important. And also, this is another mistake I often hear, a person who is involved in politics is a politician, again, not a politic. So, for example, don't say she's lost her trust in all politics. It's she's lost her trust in all politicians. And that brings us to the last word, which is policy. What is policy? Policy refers to a set of rules or plans that governs the activities of a government, a company, or an organization. So, for example, the focus of the Prime Minister's speech was foreign policy, not foreign politics. That's the mistake you need to avoid. Or these company policies, not these company politics, these company policies are outdated and need to change. Okay, that brings us to the end of the lesson. I hope that the differences, the different meanings are clear for you, and that from now on you'll be able to use all these words correctly when you speak.